I also co-founded this thing called FIBI in 2007, which why we're all here today, and I really amazed at the growth. It's been a wonderful 10 years, and I co-founded that with another gentleman by the name of Jeremy Roll. So a little bit of my investing and work experience. So each of these pictures kind of depicts my journey into real estate. So I grew up in Ventura County. My dad was in the Navy, and when he was about to retire, he was about 20 years into the service. He said, well, I wonder what I'm going to get when I retire after all these years. And then I have me and there's 3 other sisters. I found out he was going to make about 800 and something bucks a month in retirement. So he's like, oh, wow, that's not going to be enough, right? So he started to figure out how to buy real estate. So I, as a young boy, I would help him fix up the properties, and we would rent them out. He wasn't really a flipper, but what we did was we picked up some properties in Ventura County when I was a kid and learned a lot about that. When I was ready to go to college, this picture here is the courthouse steps. My dad introduced me to some investors out here in LA when I was going to college who would buy at the courthouse steps, and that was kind of my first college job. So part of my routine was wake up in the morning, drive properties before the auction, because it's really no point to drive it before that because so many get postponed. So I drive it, and then after I was done looking at maybe 6 or 7 properties that were going to sale, I would go to the bank, pick up cashier's checks, and then show up to the auctions. And that was probably the most fun I've ever had that I could look back on. In fact, as a side note, I almost dropped out of school because I was so tired from doing this job, but having so much fun that when I got to class, I would fall asleep. And then my dad saw my grades, and he was like, dude, you're going to have to finish college. So I eventually finished. And then in 1989, because I was so darn smart from all that experience, I bought my first solo investment, which was a duplex in Oxnard, California. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Does anybody know what happened in like the 1989 area of real estate in California? Anyone? Yeah, it took a big dive, right? Perfect timing for me, right? So I was so disenchanted with real estate at that time, I became a stockbroker because I saw Wall Street. Remember Bud Fox? I was like, that looks like a pretty cool gig, right? So I'm going to go put on the suit. I'm going to go work at Wall Street for a while. So I did that. And consequently, because real estate was kind of still in my blood, I met a gentleman by the name of Bruce Norris. How many people know who Bruce Norris is? I know you do, Peter. So Bruce Norris gave a speech at a LA Investment Club meeting. Does everybody remember Phyllis Rockhauer? She just passed away. I owe her a lot because I met Bruce Norris through her meeting, and he was talking about the California comeback. And what the California comeback was is about how real estate was going to double and possibly triple in the next few years. And I thought, well, you know, everybody can say that, anybody could say that, right? But this guy actually had the data and the reputation that supported it. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't be spending all this money as a stockbroker. Maybe I should buy real estate. So I did. I bought real estate, and thanks to him, I jumped out of the fishbowl of corporate life and became a full-time investor in 2001. So a little bit about my first duplex. So I'm not against real estate. I still own properties, and I have notes. So for me, it's not one or the other, but I just want to kind of tell you about my first experience. So it was 1989. Here's this kid that thinks he knows everything about real estate. I bought this duplex for $200,000. It had a $150,000 first trustee at 11%. What a great interest rate that was back then. I put my $50,000 down because I was so confident, and I became an investor. So my perfect timing was not very good. I mean, as somebody pointed out, the market immediately went down, and there were a lot of days when I was taking money out of my pocket to pay that payment when it was vacant. But eventually I did sell it. I sold it in April of 2002. I looked back at all the escrow records I kept. I sold it for $262,000. At that time, my loan balance was $146 after commissions and closing costs. So after holding it for 150 months, I got $96,000. Isn't that cool for a young guy, right? $96,000. Does anybody have a guess of what my annual rate of return was on that? Just a wild guess. It's hard to do without a financial calculator. 7,000. My percentage rate? It was actually a whopping 5.23% annualized rate. Wow, I'm so smart, right? So I had a chance, before going to the closing table, I could have said, you know what, I don't want to buy this duplex anymore. And I could have put that money in a CD. Yes, that's right, for the gray-haired ladies, right, the old people that only put in money in CDs, right? But at that time, I was paying 9%. So if I said, you know, don't be an investor in real estate, but put it in a fixed income product, I would have had, at 9%, $153,000 without dealing with all the tenants, toilets, all the headaches that I had to put up with. as a real estate investor, right? So that kind of said to me, I better learn how, number one, how to use a calculator, right? And I had a lot of learning to do. That was my most important thing. So a little bit of my philosophy and purpose of investing. You know, Christina talked about that a little bit, about what your vision is. Well, my purpose of owning real estate is I want to receive superior income with as little effort as possible. And why I want that is because I like spending time with my kids, I like going on vacation, I like helping other people. I don't want to have the burden of, like when I was a stockbroker, I had to be at the office at 6 in the morning, and then I would be working. It was like, that was not sustainable for me, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun. My second thing is I like having a small boutique operation that specializes in large margin deals in very niche markets. So I didn't want to have a lot of employees in my operation. So I'm kind of a small, you know, I have only a few employees, that's it, and that's exactly how I like it. A little bit about what I do in the note business. It's like the ABC, I call it the ABCs. I acquire notes, I broker notes, I also create notes. Those are the ABCs. My main focus, my identity is I'm a long-term holder of income-producing assets. Basically, I'm a cash flow nerd, and which is why, a quick plug, I created this website, Cash Flow Nerd. It's in development right now, but that's kind of going to be my place where I do a lot of interviews and things like that about other people and how they get cash flow, because I'm always fascinated with the different ways to make cash flow. I mean, I've invested in ATM machines. I have a guy that I talked to, he has Bitcoin ATM machines. I didn't know there was such a thing. Really interesting stuff. Mobile homes, I've done a lot of stuff. I've done syndications as well. So yeah, I'm basically a nerd. So let's talk about what is a note. Basically, a note is a promise to pay. It's a written promise to pay. Just like currency is a promise to pay. It's basically what they call a banknote, right? So a note is a promise to pay, usually a bank, and what makes the notes that I do different is that they're secured notes. They're secured by a piece of real estate. I don't do anything that's unsecured. Does that make sense? Okay. So usually with a note, there's going to be some things about, you know, what you're paid, et cetera. One important thing I wanted to point out are kind of the different ways you can hold title to a note, or how you can hold a note, or different ways to own a note. So the simplest way is when you own the whole note. There's a note, you buy the whole thing, you're the only owner, that's it, end of story. There's also something called a partial note. How many people here know what a partial note is? Right back there. Okay, so a partial note is where you only own part of the stream of payments. So if there are, say, 360 payments of that note, you can buy the first 25, the last 25, anything in the middle. There's lots of different ways to do that. There's also another way, which is what are called fractionalized notes. Does anybody know what those are? You know what those are? Okay, good. What they are is that if I decided I want to be in a note, and Peter wanted to be in a note, and then some other gentleman here wanted to be in a note, Christina wanted to be in a note, we could all own a piece of this note all together, kind of like a tenant in common of a note. And your name is actually on the deed that says Ellis San Jose owns 3% of this note, right? There are also something that's relatively new is a crowdfunding note. And this is just my bias, but I always want to point out kind of the dangers, the pluses and minuses of having these type of notes. So with a fractionalized note, if you have, say, 30 people that own a note and something goes wrong, right, God forbid, what happens next? What are the odds of all 30 people agreeing of how it's going to go? It can get kind of sticky, right? So you need to know that before you do that. The plus side is that you can get into bigger deals with that, right? You can get into apartment buildings, larger things, instead of, depending on your capital capabilities. So fractionalized notes are a way to go for a lot of people. Now, crowdfunding notes, I've just been following them recently, and sometimes I feel like I'm like the crotchety old guy on the lawn in the chair so I can get off my lawn because I'm so skeptical of everything. I get really nervous when I give money to a crowdfunded note, and did you know your name does not appear anywhere on the note? It is held by the company, the sponsor. So if something goes wrong, is your money actually secured by that house or building? No, it's that company sponsoring the note. Unless somebody can correct me I'm wrong, that makes me a little nervous. Now, so far, everything seems okay in that industry. I haven't seen any problems. But I just want to point out that if we look back at the tape, like, 10 years later and say, well, Ellis said something about these crowdfunding notes, just be careful. Get good advice. Well, it says, well, here's a house, and then this sponsoring company is the beneficiary, and then the beneficiary promises to pay all the other shareholders, right? But you're not named on there. You're not named on the note. So there could be issues there. But like I said, nothing's gone wrong yet, but just I feel it's my public service to make sure that you know how to do it, all right? Or that you look out for yourself, because what's happening now is there's a lot of people promising yields that look really attractive. So you got to be careful. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Yeah.
What is the legal recourse if the person whose name the note is on absconds, of course, runs away? What legal recourse? Because you said you're not named. So
Yeah, that's why I'm not an attorney, so I wouldn't.
You don't have the asset, and he could, right?
So I'm that crotchety guy on the lawn that is always skeptical of everything.
I'm sitting next to you.
You're right. Okay, I got plenty of room on my chair, right? So I'm like, okay, what if all this happens? And there has to be a degree of lack of control that you're comfortable with there.
Right.
So just know that, okay? Right, there you go, right. So it's an interesting phenomenon because they're raising a lot of money that way, but I'm just saying be careful. Let's see, how are we doing? All right. Okay, so there are 4 levels of note investing, and I actually, as I was doing this slide, I thought, maybe there's more than 4. So I'm going to run it by and see what you think. So the level 1 is originating or creating loans or buying performing notes. So basically, Peter says, hey, I saw this house that I want to buy in an investor. I'm a little short of capital. Hey, you interested in investing? I'll pay you 7%. I'm like, okay, so here's the money. I just originated a note to Peter, right? Very simple. That's creating a loan. Or I could buy a performing note so that I lent this money to Peter, and for the next 3-4 months, he's been paying me on time perfect, but I want to take my cash out and put it into somebody else's syndication because I think that's going to be a return that's more suitable. So now somebody else can come along and buy that performing note. There's never been a missed payment. Everything's fine. That's level 1. Now level 2 is buying discounted performing notes. So that is where the note is performing. There's never been an interruption in payment. But because for whatever reason this person wants to sell it, he's willing to discount it so that I can get a better yield. So that's kind of level 2, and that's why you need the calculator. And just to give a quick plug to my friend Kenny and Kyle, they have this HB2 calculator, which is awesome. I use it every day. I was showing David how many calculations I have on this thing in just one day. But it's really awesome. So if you have a chance, you should take a look at that and maybe take a calculator class as well. So those are kind of the level 1 and 2. So level 3 is buying discounted non-performing first trust deeds. So the difference between the first 2 levels is this note has a problem. The person that is supposed to be paying has not been paying for whatever reason. And because of that, they're going to discount it. How much is negotiable? But now you have to know more about, okay, what do I have to do to make this performing again? Or how do I make money out of my note, right? So that's kind of level 3. Level 4 is where you're buying non-performing junior liens, so anything below a first trust deed. So the 5th level I thought about was there's a lot of things that are like problem notes that have improper title and things like that, but that's way advanced, but I thought there's probably another level. So those are kind of the 4 levels that initially I wanted to share with you. Any questions on that? Yeah?
Yeah, like is there a general rule of thumb when it becomes performing?
You can call it performing when you start getting a regular payment. What is a regular payment? That's hard to say. But if I were to sell a note to Peter, he would say, well, how long have I been making on-time payments? And I'd have to show my record. And then it's really up to him to say, well, that's barely performing, or what they call a note that hasn't paid for a while, but then they start paying again. That's called a reperforming note. So that's kind of like a tier below a performing note because there was a problem in the past. So the gold standard is performing note, never been a problem, never missed a payment. The money's in your mailbox. You don't have to worry about it. That's kind of the gold, right? Everything else below that is you have to be careful. Any other questions on that?
The last 10 years have redefined performing.
Yeah, it's a moving target. Peter is exactly right about that. So yeah, the banks are kind of a mess. So basic questions to ask, at least this is what came to my mind when I first started note investing, is, well, how well is my investment secured? Like, what happens if it hits the fan, right? How, what's going to happen? And then I want to know, well, how much am I supposed to get paid, right? And then a big question, can I enforce the payment or the payoff in case there's something that happens? They stop paying me. What if you had a note in Houston where it got flooded out, right? What's going to happen there? Or a fire in Santa Rosa, right? What happens in those cases? So how is your investment secured? It's secured by a mortgage or trust deed. In California, it's a trust deed state. So in the county recorder's office of where that property is located, there's going to be a formal document that tells the world that if Peter's my investor, Peter has a loan on this property, and everybody below him is subordinated to him. He gets first dibs on what happens to that property. He needs to be paid first. If they didn't have that, everybody would get all kinds of loans and nobody would be protected, right? So that is how your investment is secured. You have a public record of you being the note holder. Now, how much am I supposed to get paid? That is usually printed out on the contract of the note about how often you get paid and how much, and the interest rate. And can I enforce payment, payoff in case of natural disaster, et cetera? That has to be spelled out in the note itself. It usually won't be in the trust deed that's recorded, but it's in the note. So there's two documents when you have a note. One is the trust deed or mortgage that is actually recorded, and then there's the separate note that has kind of all the other agreements that go together with that trust deed. Make sense? Okay, good. So, if I could simplify it, I like really simple. I'm not that bright of a guy. I want to make sure I don't make mistakes, so I keep it simple. So my simplification is kind of these four things I look at. I want to look at the collateral, number one. I want to look at the contract or the note itself to make sure I can answer all those questions previously on their page, right? What happens if this happens, that I want to know. How am I protected? So the collateral contract. Third, the borrower. Right? In most of the notes that I do, I'm not as concerned about the borrower, and I'll tell you why later. But the borrower is important because you want to know what is their ability to pay you back, right? How are they going to pay you back? What's their plan? And then the biggest question that I ask, and I learned this from some old grizzled veterans, it says, is this a happy, happy note? Does anybody know what that means? You're happy if they pay, and you're happy if they don't. So, yeah, all right. Now, I chuckled when I first heard it, but it makes a lot of sense because I would have to say all of the notes that I have, I sleep pretty well at night because, hey, they're paying me a good yield, great. I'm happy to collect that payment. But if they stop paying me and I have to take the property back, I'm not stressed about it at all. That's fine with me. I bought it at the right price. So let's talk about collateral. My theory in note investing is that it's the collateral that always pays you back. It's really not the borrower, the bottom line for me. So you have to be able to determine value. And what really helped me as a note investor was being a real estate investor first, because I was able to be comfortable establishing value for whatever that collateral was, for that collateral for my note. So if you asked me, okay, here's this duplex in the San Gabriel Valley, and they want to borrow $200,000 against it, and it's worth $400,000, I would say, okay, well, let me check it out, and I would be comfortable saying, okay, that makes sense, right? That's why I love note investing, because it ties so much hand in hand with real estate investing. It's so compatible that it makes a lot of sense. Then I want to check what the combined loan to value is. So I want to know how much total debt there is on that property versus its value, because that has an important bearing on what happens if things go wrong. You want to know, where am I in line in this party, right? So you like to have title insurance so that if there is any other loans on this property or your loan on the property, it's an insured transaction. Because when they're not insured, there can be a lot of problems. It can really affect the marketability and the value of that note. And as I mentioned, priority. So everybody knows what a first mortgage is, right? Second mortgage. So it goes on down the line. There can be, I've seen 5, 6, 7 notes on a property. And it's interesting because I'll talk to a lot of borrowers that think that because I have a second trust deed, I can't foreclose on their property. They'll say, but you have a second. I'm like, yeah, so, right? So how it works is in foreclosure, if the person isn't paying and it goes to auction, like what I was doing in college, the bidder will make a bid, and that money first goes to the first trust deed holder, and then it goes all the way down to the other trust deed holders until they're all paid off, then to the unsecured liens, and then if there's anything left after that, it goes to the actual ex-property owner, right? So that's why priority is really important. You need to know, where am I in this whole scenario? Am I in first position? Am I second? Luckily, I have had some funny things happen where I thought I was in second, but I really was in first. So sometimes that happens where, you know, there's someone that has a first trustee that got paid off but forgot to record the what do you call it, the reconveyance, and you're like, well, you know, it's still a good deal with that first on there, but then you find out it's gone. You're like, oh my gosh, you know, what a present from heaven, right? That's called Christmas for sure. And I've had a couple of those things happen to me. The nastiest ones are when it works the other way, where you think you have a first or a second, and then you're actually, wait, there's another deed that I didn't find up there. So really important to understand your priority and your ratios, and you need to understand value because that's what's going to ultimately protect you. So that's a collateral. Yeah?
What's your comfort level on the combined LTV?
Depends on the property.
Yeah.
I rarely will do over 70% on anything. And it's really hard because a lot of times I see new note investors now going up into the 90s. I've seen people go where it's what they call emotional equity, where there is no real equity, but they give it a name called emotional equity, so they think they could collect. We can talk about that later, but I'm still the guy on the lawn chair, the gray hair, you know, I'm going to do it the old way. I want to have plenty of equity. I want to have 30% equity at least, if not more. So the second part is the contract. This is the hardest one to teach because it's really, you have to have a legal background to understand all the things in the note. But you want to understand, at the very basic, is the responsibilities of the borrower. How are late payments handled? How are non-payments handled? Miscellaneous clauses, things like, oh, look, they let their fire insurance lapse, right? Oh, they turned their house into a crack house, but they're still making the payments. You know, all these things. Recourse. Does everybody know what recourse is? You better know this, because if you ever take out loans with recourse, that means that if something goes wrong with your project and you're unable to pay, the bank forecloses and they're short from what they collected on the foreclosure, well, they can go after all your other assets, okay? I learned the importance of this a couple years ago. I was in a condo conversion project in Austin, Texas, and they made all the partners sign with recourse for like a $4 million loan. And I had a very hard time sleeping when that project was going until we finally got that thing paid off. I have known, luckily it worked out. Everything was great with that project. We did well. But I know several people close to me that has ruined them, is that they've taken a lot of recourse loans, and as everybody knows, the market's great, and then it's not so great. And when it's not so great, recourse loans can ruin you, okay? Another clause is acceleration clause. What can cause me to collect the outstanding balance very quickly up front, like a balloon payment? Everyone knows what a balloon payment is. Or a callable clause. I use that a lot, where I can lend you money, and then for, say, the next few years, everything is going fine, but then I have the option to say, you know what, Pete, I want to get paid now. Or I can just say, no, just let's keep it rolling. So that's my call. I can call it whether I want to or not. So I really like callable features. I use that a lot in my notes. But there's so many that if you're going to get into note investing, it really is a smart move to have an attorney review the note with you to explain all the questions you may have, and especially the questions that you don't know you have to ask, okay? So that's very important in the contract. Now, I talked about the borrower and how that's not as important to me, but that's just because of the style of how I do notes. But it can be important because you want to know what their ability to pay is, their exit strategy, and my most important thing is what is their past behavior, how they handled debt in the past. So everybody knows what hard money is, right? There's a lot of hard money lenders out there. So if I was a hard money lender, which I'm not, and I wanted to lend to an investor, I would say, okay, well, how are you going to pay me back? I want to know, okay, what are your exit strategies? Oh, you're going to add on some square footage, blah, blah, blah. okay, that makes sense. Let me see the values. How much skin do you have in it? Because what I don't want to see is somebody say, well, you know what? It's not working out. Here are the keys. Good luck with it, right? I want to see how they've handled debt in the past. When I'm buying non-performing notes, I want to see the history of this person's behavior. Have they had trouble in the past, but they've worked themselves out of it? Or are they serial bankruptcy filers, right? All that is very important information because I'm willing to bank on past behavior for future results. Almost every time, I've rarely been surprised where I see somebody's credit history and then they do something different, right? It's just, like I said, I'm the crotch deal guy that says, you know, that's just the way it's going to go. So that's what I look at. Let's see. Okay. Quick question to everybody out here, and raise your hands if you agree. The higher the yield, the greater the risk. Agree or disagree? A lot of people? Okay, agree with that? I used to believe in that, but now I believe that there's kind of the X factor, which is knowledge. And I'll show you why. Okay, here's a typical note, right, that you see, a typical loan, institutional loan. Say it's a $400,000 property. They're going to get $360,000 loan. They have a 10% down payment, 680, 700 FICO score, which is pretty darn good, right? And it's a 4% yielding note, right? Does that look very risky to you? Right? The government does this all the time, right? All the institutional notes kind of follow this template. Here is a note that I bought. Oops. $350,000 property. There's a $285,000 loan on it. I only bought the first couple of payments. I think it was like 60 months of payment. No, it was like 50 months of payments. I bought it for $60,000. It's a 17% loan to value. Thing's worth $350. I only have 60 in it, right? Lady's got a 580 FICO score, right? I'm yielding 15.5% on that note, right? And to top it off, she's always late. Like every month, she's always late. So really, my yield is close to 20% every year, right? Oops. So in my mind, this is a riskier yield. This is a riskier note because I only have 10% down, right? If this thing goes bad and I start incurring a lot of expenses, I'm not really getting rewarded for it. I'm only getting 4% yield.
There's no collateral.
There's nothing there, right? Right. You're relying on this FICO score. You're putting a whole lot of weight on that. And because I'm the way I am, I like this one better. I don't care. You want to pay me? Fine. You don't want to pay me? Fine. I think she's going to pay me, right? Even though she pays me late, that's fine. But I mean, I always think about, it's funny, I was at a mastermind meeting a couple weeks ago, and I was saying, well, you know, this lady's always late. You know, I wonder if I should foreclose on her just to kind of shake her up a bit. And one guy said to me, you know, if your money's accruing at 20% annually, there's not a whole lot of things that do that without a whole lot of, work. And one thing I like about notes is that you always get paid. The property's going to pay you, right? As long as you bought it right, the property's going to pay you. It doesn't matter if this borrower goes away. The property always pays me. So I sleep really well at night with this note. And that's why when I go back to it, which is, the higher the yield, the greater the risk. No, I don't believe that at all. I think you have to know you have to know what you're doing, and you have to change that with the X factor, which is knowledge.
Question?
Yeah.
The remainder of the funding, was that other investors?
No. So say that you own this note for $285,000, right? And you came to me and said, look, I don't want to sell my whole note. I only need $60,000 because if you were to sell me that whole note, I might only get maybe $170,000 for it. I don't want to take that big of a discount. So I said, okay, why don't I'll pay you this much for the next 50 payments, and then I'll give the note back to you after it's done, after I'm done getting these payments, right? So that's what a partial is. So it's usually retained by the original note holder. Yeah, I'm back.
Question. So, granted, let's say you had to go through the foreclosure process and you had your $60,000 note, would you still be obligated to pay the remainder of that $285,000 through foreclosure?
I am, but a little advanced strategy. The way I don't know if I should be telling these secrets, but what I did was I made this agreement with the seller that if anything happens with the note, I will guarantee the other payments, right? So, and I also have an option to buy the rest of that note. Okay?
Do you service the payments on?
Yeah. So why that is important is because if I foreclosed tomorrow, I would get $285,000 in my pocket, but I would just have to start paying this other person after the 50 payments were made the same amount that I was getting every month. Not a lump sum, but I would just have to pay it. So if you work it out with a financial calculator, you'll understand how important of a distinction that was of how I built that into the note. So that was a very good question. Yeah.
But isn't it like being in second position the way you structure it?
Very much so. Yeah.
You're in control.
Right. Because I have an option on that note, the rest of that note is very hard to end up in anyone's hands but mine. Right. So that's kind of a little more advanced, but the important thing is I'm all about making sure that I cover as many bases as I can, right? Some advanced strategies and notes. Does anybody know what an equity participation note is? Okay. You're very knowledgeable. You raise your hand up quite a bit. We have to talk after the meeting. Equity participation note. So there is basically two components to it. One is where you're getting a monthly interest rate as a lender, but also you're participating in the growth of that asset. So I did this for my kids' college fund. I had them open up IRAs a long time ago when they were little, and we had a chunk of money, and then I knew somebody that was a really good investor buyer. So we lent him the money, or my kids lent the money, and we said, you know what? My 8-year-old really doesn't need income right now. So to help you carry this property for the next couple of years and let it grow, it's going to be a negligible interest rate, say 0%, right? Or I think we had like a fixed guaranteed rate at the end. But when you sell it, you're going to share the profit with my kids. I think it was like 35, 40%, right? So I did a whole bunch of these with my kids. When I got the phone call about, 6 years later we're going to sell this property, I think it's probably at a really good price now. Is it okay if I pay you guys off? And I said, lo and behold, I've got one of the kids, first year college paid off. Wow, that was great, right? So there's still a couple of them out there. But what I love about this strategy is that, people always ask me, what's customary for a note? Well, when you're writing notes, you can make it customized to what purpose you want. So what is your vision? What is your dream, right? Do I want current income? Am I willing to defer current income so I get to take a piece of the pie? There's so many things you could do with notes. Second one is a convertible note. So that is where, I know you're going to raise your hand because you probably know what a convertible note is, right? So you have a note that you lend somebody money and it's debt, but lo and behold, at a certain point in time, that turns into equity that can be exchanged. Now, the people in the audience that understand the value of that is because you can turn debt into equity, and then what can you do with a 1031 exchange? Exchange it tax-free. So there's some brilliance to that, and for the right opportunity, that can be a really wonderful thing to use. Wrap notes. Those are a little bit complicated to explain, but basically what it is somebody else has a loan on a property, and then I come in with a little bit more money, and instead of getting paid as a second, what I do is I leverage that first trust deed all into one payment with a new higher rate, and then I make sure that I pay the first. So it's a little complicated, but it's a very powerful tool, wrapping notes. Then the partials, that's also that I talked about with that example that I just recently did. So those are advanced strategies. Any questions on some of that? Okay, great. Oops, I'm going to go to, looks like we have a little time. Let's see what time we have, 8:30. Oh, good, right ahead of schedule. So, like I said, I am not pro-note, pro-real estate. There's a lot of pluses and minuses. I do both. So I wanted to kind of write down things that I liked about notes and what I liked about properties and pros and cons. So the number one thing with real estate, the cash flow is evergreen. As long as I own that property and I'm getting rent, that's going to pay me forever, right? From me or my heirs. With the notes, it usually has a lifespan, right? It's going to end in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. So sometimes the the saddest day in my life is when a note pays off, because then, no more cash flow comes in. I got to go find some more. Real estate can't appreciate, or real estate can appreciate over time. Notes typically do not, except for the asterisk is there unless you buy a deeply discounted note, okay? Real estate has so many tax advantages: depreciation, interest deductions, all these other things, right? Notes, unless it's in a tax advantage account, you really have no place to hide with that income. It's really difficult to offset that income. So it's really beneficial to have it in a tax advantaged account. Real estate, you're managing tenants. We were talking earlier today about real estate would be great if it wasn't for tenants sometimes, right? I mean, I have some great tenants, and they allow me to have the lifestyle I have, but I've also had some times where, oh my gosh, what can I do to get rid of this person, right? Note holders are lenders, and it's more of a passive management. It's easily scalable in a lot of ways. Okay, here's one of my nightmare tenant stories. So I have this fourplex, and there's this guy that was my tenant, and he was behind in rent, and he was about to get evicted. So instead of just leaving, he decided to launch himself off the roof, a 2-story building, right? And then claimed that I had a defective patio or whatever. So I get sued, right? Lovely. If I was a note holder on that, would I really care? I'm like, oh, dude, really sorry, but I'm just a note holder, right? So I'm just the bank. So if a roof caves in, if anything else like that, it's the property owner's responsibility, not mine when I'm a note holder. Higher liability, like I said, with that lovely tenant that launched himself off the second floor. Way more liability with a note, very limited liability. Typically lower investment requirements in notes. If you wanted to buy an investment property here in Southern California, what's kind of the entry-level price? $300,000-$400,000 maybe?
Oh, for a house?
Yeah, for a house here.
5-6.
5-6, okay. So yeah, it's a little bit higher, right? I've bought notes as low as a couple $100, $1,000, $20,000. It's a lot easier to diversify. And the bottom one, which I really like, is the scalability on note investing. It's easier. If you've had 100 properties and you've experienced what that's like, and then you have 100 notes, I guarantee you with 100 notes, you're still spending a lot of time with your family and kids. With 100 properties, they're saying, where's daddy? So trust me on that. So that's why I like both, but I also understand what the limitations are, okay? We have some time, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the dark arts of real estate. Ooh, spooky. So this is what one of my favorite parts of real estate is, because I've been able to kind of bridge both. I'm going to talk about some of the stories that I've done. Okay, so you like this property?
Yes.
Beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, Peter's like salivating. Anytime you see board ups, that means profit, baby, right? So here's the facts on this one. $60,000 house, really, in Southern California, right? $60,000 house. Had a $40,000 loan on it. No payments have been made in 4 years. It was boarded up and vacant. The market rent on this property is $700, right? Would you buy this $60,000 house in its condition for $40,000?
Yes.
You would. Sold. It's yours. No, I'm just kidding. But I thought I could do better, right? So I found the note holder, which is a private lender. She was in Northern California. And she was up to her eyeballs in trying to deal with this property. She was getting notices from the city, you got to clean up your property, blah, 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 we're going to sue you, blah, blah, blah. So I bought that $40,000 loan for $3,000. I fixed it up for about 15 grand. I hired this company. If you don't know, it's very helpful. It's called We Go Look. And what I had them do, I said, go out there, take some film of the property, of the neighborhood, so I can see kind of what I'm dealing with there, because I don't want to have to drive all the way up there and then say, oh, it's not worth it to bid on, and waste my time.
How much do they charge?
Oh man, I think I paid them like $100, $200, I don't know. It was totally worth it. So they gave me a nice video, they gave me the surroundings. I'm like, hey, this is a pretty nice area, for considering, right? So for $3,000, would you buy this $60,000 house for? Yeah, even better, right? So that's exactly what I did. Fixed it up, and exit strategies. I can get it ended up being a little bit lower on the gross rent. It's about 600 something. with 45% expenses, my 300 monthly income, 31% annual return if I were to fix it up and rent it out, right? Looks good. If I fixed and flipped it, I could sell for 60 minus selling costs, maybe net 40 on my terms. That's a 200% return. So really good numbers, right? And that's the kitchen now. I fixed it up. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's in Kern County. Kern County, yeah. Or what I could do is I could sell it for $70,000, carry back a note on an easy qualify loan, ask for $20,000 down, carry the other $50,000 myself, ask for $400 a month for 360 months. So my $20,000 investment, what would my return be? I don't really have to calculate it because I know it's pretty damn good, right? So that's another cool thing you could do. The dark arts of real estate, right? Now you can carry back. There's so many moving parts to this that I have so many options. This is a little bit about AIT. So did I answer your question about how you can make money in notes?
I'm getting.
You got it, okay. Peter, you wanted to know more about my prospecting activity, right? I didn't really cover that. So what my prospecting activity looks like is I do a lot of direct mail to note holders because my favorite deals are buying from private individuals or small companies. I have bought from banks before. I used to buy quite a bit in the heyday from Wells Fargo, GMAC, a lot of these other banks. We used to buy pools of them when it was really well priced. Now I'm not so excited about the pricing, so that's why I've leaned more on private notes. So my prospecting routine looks like direct mail. If they respond, I follow up, negotiate. Occasionally I will look at some institutional every now and then. But my favorite things to do now are mining for private notes. And there aren't as many as there used to be out there because financing has been so easy, but there are some niches out there. Like I said, my mission, big margins and niches, and that's what I do. I'm going to skip over the AITD if that's okay. So here is, it's not so recent, but it's a deal I did a couple years ago. This was a non-performing note in Baldwin Park, not too far away from here. At the time, in the condition that it was in, it was probably worth about $290,000, $300,000, okay? And the first trust deed was $207,000. It was current, so that means that owner was making payments on the first, but on the second, it was $104,000, so we're underwater, right? We're a little underwater on that. And he hadn't made payments in 12 months. At the time, the banks were really wanting to get rid of bad debt. We bought that for $11,000, and his scheduled payment was $475 a month on that note, but he wasn't paying. We called him up and said, "Sir, we are now the new note holder of your property, and you haven't been making payments. What's going on?" And he said, "Well, times have been hard, blah, blah, blah. Can we figure something out?" So we did. I said, "Okay, well, if you pay as agreed, $475, just start making payments again, I would get a 51% yield, right? If I do a workout, which basically says, well, I'm going to charge him $5,000 up front to do a workout, I'll cut his payments down to $200 a month and reduce his balance to, what, $70,000 maybe? I'm willing to play ball. If I did that, is that a win for him, reducing his payment? Yeah. So it's a win-win, right? My yield is 40%, 39, 40%. That's still okay, right? Yeah, I'm not going to, who's going to turn down 40% here? Anyone? No one, right? So I said, okay, I'm willing to do that. Or if you don't want to play ball with that, we can sell. We'll foreclose, or you just give us the cash for keys, right? And we can do that. If we do that at a short sale and play at $290, pay me off at $70,000. If I did it in 6 months after I bought it, my return would be 433%. Not too shabby, right? I'm joking. That's a fabulous return if that happens, right? Or another exit, foreclose, deed in lieu, quick sale price at $260, and get a profit of $25,000. That works too because I paid $11,000. Not too bad. I could help him refinance so he can finance me out. Multiple possibilities, lots of ways out on this thing. I'm not just fixing and flipping. I've got many avenues. That's what I love about notes. Here's what really happened. He said, there's no way I'm paying that interest rate, because I forget what their interest rate was. It's like 8% or something. He said, there's no way I'm going to do that. And I said, well, what if I charge you 0% interest, but you pay me $1,000 a month? Because he wanted to pay low interest. And I said, how does zero interest grab you? And he's like, what? I like zero interest. But the only way I'll take zero interest is if you pay me $1,000 a month. But that will just like amortize down your loan fast. He was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. I said, fine. Now my return is 150%. The thing I learned here is not to insist on my pre-planned exit strategies, but to listen to the person on the other side of the phone. His trigger was the percent interest rate. Now, keep in mind, he wasn't paying. He had totally bad credit, but he wanted to negotiate interest. So, in my younger years, I would have fought him tooth and nail and said, no, you haven't been paying. You got to pay 8%. But my smarter, wiser, older self said, let him have what he wants. I said, okay, fine. I'll give you 0%. You give me 1,000, and now I got 150% return. Make sense? Yeah, very cool. Here's another one that we did a couple years ago. Garden Grove. There was it was a fourplex. The BPO value at the time. Everybody know what BPO means? Broker's price opinion. So you get a broker to say, okay, what do you think this property is worth in as-is condition? So they said, oh, it's $750. Everybody follow that far? Okay. So there was a first trust deed of $474. There was a second of $250, which we bought for $47,000, right? And then plus there was a third trust deed for $225,000. So you could see he was underwater with all this stuff, but we got in at a decent position here for 47, so we were in pretty good shape. So his total debt was $949 on a 750 house, or 750 fourplex rather. So so here's what happened before I get to the closing statement. So they were very, very difficult to deal with, and eventually what happened was we got to do a short sale on this. We got the agent on board to help us out. But one of the most important things I learned here was, you see this debt here for $225? We had a couple of choices. We could have foreclosed on this debt to wipe it out, right? But what we chose instead to do is we paid, I think, maybe $10,000, $20,000 on this, because they were underwater anyway. But do you want to know why the reason we paid this and didn't insist on foreclosing it out and we would have paid zero if we foreclosed them out? Do you know why we did that? It was really about speed and control. So in a short sale, if I didn't own that, well, they would have to approve the short sale, right? But because I owned it, do you think I'm going to give them any problems in the short sale? It was totally worth paying for that note just to have that control and make things go faster. So they sold the property for $750, all these other prorations, closing out commissions, made $210,000 off of our $47,000 investment. So those are kind of the dark arts of notes when you start to learn kind of the ins and outs. So I figured out the annualized on that was about 194%. Pretty cool. I had some other investors in this, so they were pretty happy. But the only bad thing is I spoiled them. So anything less than 194, like, is that all you're going to make for me? So, oh, I wanted to share with you. We have time. I want to talk about my very first note purchase. Okay, so remember I was a stockbroker, right? And I remember very vividly when 9/11 happened, because all the financial institutions were like scared, right? Because all the bad things that were happening. And it also kind of gave me a wake-up call of saying, if you're going to do something that matters, what are you waiting for? And I had plenty of experience in real estate, but I was so nervous to kind of cut off that paycheck. But in 2001, I did it. I said, okay, I'm going to quit. And I started knocking on doors, trying to buy foreclosures. Knocking on doors, having people curse at me, scream at me, and I was getting really beat up because I wasn't closing any deals. And my wife was like, are you sure this is going to work out? And I'm like, I think so. So I started losing confidence. And then one day, I was belly aching about it, and one of my mentors said, well, why don't you just buy the note? I go, well, what? And Peter knows who that guy is, right? We're down in San Diego, and he was not as nice as I'm making it sound. So he was like, what's wrong with you? Stop crying, get back out there and learn more about the business. So I did. I started learning about notes. So my very first note was a on a condominium Gardena back in 2002. The value then was 160. That's how old I am. A long time ago. There was a first with Washington Mutual of 112, and there was a second with a private lender for $14,000. So there was about $34,000 in equity in that property. You follow me so far? Okay, so I'm like, okay, I think I understand what's going on here. There's a little bit of equity there. I contacted the second lender for the $14,000 note, and I negotiated it down from $14,000 to $850. My very first note, right? I'm like, oh my God, he said yes. I should have started lower. But here's the thing. This was like perfect time. Talk about, I don't know if you believe in divine intervention, but if I had lost this $850, I would have been okay. So it was perfect for me to kind of cut my teeth and learn. So I bought this $14,000 note for $850. And I was so happy. There's the actual cash. I kept the cashier's check, copy of the cashier's check. $850. And yeah, so I'm here. Okay, here's your money. I'm here now. I have this note, and so I contact the note holder or the homeowner, and I say, I'm the new holder of the note. Wanted to know when you're going to start making payments again. And she was like, what? I made payments in 4 years. Why should I pay now? I'm like, okay. She wasn't very nice to me. And so I called my friends over at the trustee foreclosure service, and I started a foreclosure. And then she said, what's this all about? I said, well, I'm just merely enforcing the note. I have this $14,000 note. You haven't made payments on it. So, let's figure something out. Well, she figured it out by declaring bankruptcy. Now, how many people here would say, oh no, right? Well, I wasn't so angry about that because here's what happens in bankruptcy. If I'm the borrower that's not making payments and I declare bankruptcy, I go to the court, I say, look, I can't make payments on this. I need time. They'll say, okay, well, how much can you afford to make? And the court is going to collect the money from you beforehand. So remember, if the court is doing that for me, I don't have to do anything. I just sit back and collect checks. And at that time, I think she was making me $800 a month payments. Now remember, I bought this note for $850, and then I'm getting payments from the bankruptcy court for $850. And I was like, let's see how long we can keep this going. Come on, let's go. So what happened was she eventually paid me off, and the total arrears with everything was $15,565 off of that $850 investment. So why this was perfect divine intervention? Because this said to me that I'm not stupid. I can figure this thing out. I can actually do this note business. It gave me a whole lot of confidence. And then I started going on a tear and buying more and more. And I think it was Sam that asked me, how'd you start in the note business? And I wanted you to wait to kind of see this story. So I figured it out. So 24 months later, I got paid off, and I made 154% of my money. He's on fire. Yeah. So not all of them are this great. Of course, I'm going to give you like the coolest stories, right? Not all of them happen this great. But I'll tell you, it is a great complement to my real estate business because there's a part of my income that I don't have to worry about as much. And I'm kind of growing and protecting my portfolio at the same time with notes. And that's it for me, unless you have any other questions. Yeah, thanks.
Your different types of collateral and what kind of your appetite is for seeing how we're kind of way up
Right.
the top of the market here, wherever the hell we are.
Excellent question. So the question is the different types of collateral. I'm going to answer it in different ways. Well, there's houses, there's commercial, there's so many different types of collateral, and they all have kind of their idiosyncrasies about them. So I did a loan on a commercial property in Colton that was vacant. Now, that collateral is way different than a single family house that I did a loan on in Bakersfield, right? There's two different things here. All things being equal, what has the most risk of being vacant a long time, the commercial property or the house? Commercial. It's the commercial, right? So you have to mitigate some of the risk with that with maybe a lower LTV, a higher interest rate, other collateral. So what we did is we collateralized that commercial property with other properties as well. So we did what's called a blanket loan. So like I said, what I love about notes is that you can kind of create it to suit your needs. So I said, look, this is too much risk for me and my investors. let's put another couple of pieces in here to give us a little bit more collateral. So in case something goes wrong, we have multiple ways to get paid, right? So this is like one of my top questions. What happens is everything goes wrong, how do I get paid? So as far as percentage goes, I always say that 70% is kind of like a really easy number for me, but when you have an inflated market, 30% collateral dissipates quickly. So you got to be really, really careful. Most of the time, and which is why when I did that partial note, I was 17%. I love it when I'm under 50. If I'm under 50, I think I could weather a lot of problems. As I go up, hard money lenders, I think the rule of thumb is around 65%, but I see people going really high now. I think this whole market is kind of out of whack, and I know I leave a lot of money on the table not participating in the enthusiasm, but I also know that I've lasted in this business since 1989, and I probably won't do a whole lot of changing in how I view things. So the different types of collateral you have to apply differently, but I look at collateral very deep compared to the borrower. If the borrower has an 800 FICO score, but I don't have enough collateral, it doesn't matter because they might walk away. And it's, it's a business decision for them many times, right?
So do you participate in land, modular, do you participate in all that stuff?
I don't do land. I've done mobile homes on land. I've done regular houses. I've done commercial. One of the favorite things I do is I like to do things like where there's title issues, like somebody that's in probate or something, so that there's usually plenty of equity there, but you really have to understand how to protect yourself in those situations when you're lending money. There's one where I have, it's actually on land, but there's like multiple heirs and they need to pay property taxes. So, for a $100,000, $200,000 piece of land, they need like $11,000. I'm not too concerned, right? So I play it really safe when it comes to stuff like that. The higher that I go in LTV, the more that the borrower becomes very, very important, becomes like personal relationship time, right? So hope that answers your question. Yeah. Question.
What are some of the incentives and the tactics you've used to negotiate those notes to those prices, like to $850?
That's a very great question. So why would somebody sell me a $14,000 note for $850, right? You're like, what? It's usually, they have a different agenda than I do. Something's going on in their life where they don't want to go to the attorney, pay for all this stuff, deal with, they're just like, look, I just want it out of my hair. Banks were basically throwing notes at us because what would happen is, remember when all the banks would fail? So a big bank would take over another bank and like, look at all this stuff, we don't know what it is, let's just get it off our books. And that Garden Grove fourplex I showed you, they thought it was a condo. They didn't even know it was a fourplex, right? If they had any knowledge of the area, there are no $750,000 condos in Garden Grove. We knew that, right? We were like, what is this? It says condo. This is wrong, right? So the negotiating tactics are, you need to understand what their needs are. Like that partial I bought, this woman was tired of dealing with these late payments, and she needed $60,000 for, she said home improvement. I really don't know what she needed. She probably needed it for something else. But she was happy to give me that, and I was, more than happy to accommodate her. So there's many times in your life, especially in my life, when I said I would rather have a lump sum than little payments. And there's times in my life when I would rather have little payments than a lump sum. It really depends. So, a lot of the negotiation is what's happening on that other person's, they might need money for something and they don't want to collect it a little at a time. So hopefully that answers your question on that.
Can you get insurance on notes?
Insurance?
Can they be insured in any way?
Not typically. I know like government notes have government insurance, but that's usually for the institutional level. But for private investors, little investors like me, there's no insurance for that. Yeah, you're welcome.
What
Question?
states do you like to buy notes?
California.
You're all California.
I've bought out-of-state notes and I've done okay, but I've also had some of my worst experiences. I just took a big loss on a note in Florida because, do you know when everything looks cheap to you and you're like, that looks cheap, what could possibly go wrong? If you ever think that again, use me as a lesson because a lot of things can go wrong, and just because it looks cheap doesn't mean it is.
You can example that Florida deal that you lost on.
Okay, so there was a condo in Miami, and we had some pretty good protection on there. I think it was like a $20,000 or $30,000 note, and maybe there was maybe 40,000 equity. We were kind of like borderline, and the guy was making payments on the first, so that's always a good sign, right? But what we didn't know, and which we should have known, we should have done more of a background check on the borrower, because the borrower was a famous litigator in the state of Florida as far as perpetuating a lot of shenanigans with the courts. He was a realtor, and he bought a lot of properties, and he didn't pay a lot of people back, and he knew how to use the system to really delay it. And in Florida, instead of going to what's called a trustee state, where you say, okay, I want to foreclose, you go to a third party, they foreclose for you. Here it's like 90 days, boom, 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 you're done. You have to go to the court. You have to petition the court and go see a judge. So we settled this case this year, and it was like 4 years later. And I was so happy they only lost like $20,000 on this deal. I was like, and I did this with a partner. I'm just like, hey, whenever you think I know what I'm talking about, remind me of this, because once you get overconfident, you do stuff like that, right? So what was happening was, in the rush of buying stuff from the banks, because they were throwing everything at us, like, and we were just like, oh yeah, buy. Oh, we got the Garden Grove. Oh, how bad could this possibly be, right? So you kind of have to take the good with the bad when you're moving fast. But I've kind of shifted gears, and that's why I want to be a small boutique shop. I want to have my arms around everything. I want to know it inside and out. And if I give up money because I'm not scaling up to, that's okay with me. That's just who I am. And I've kind of come to grips with that I like large margin deals, and I like manageable volume, right? I want to be able to look at every deal and know that I've covered all my bases. I've answered kind of the 4 questions, right? The simplified: collateral, contract, borrower, and then is it a happy note? And if if I get 3 out of 4, that's pretty good, but that 4th one could really bite you, right? So that's one thing I've learned. Any other questions? Yeah, Helen. Go ahead, Helen.
Have you ever bought notes that are in active foreclosure, bankruptcy?
Active bankruptcy? I believe I have when we were buying pools.
And do you want to mess with that? What are the pros and cons?
Well, the pros is that, like like my example where I had a note in bankruptcy, where you actually have the court collect, so that's a positive thing. The bad thing is, depending on who your legal representation is, if they're not doing a good job and you want to switch horses in the middle, that can get really, and that's actually what happened to us in that Florida note, is that we switched law firms, I think, 3 or 4 times. It was horrible. And if you can imagine losing all that time, and then this guy knew the system. So I like to pride myself in having an edge on my competition. This guy totally had an edge on me. He knew Florida way better than me. He knew all, and I was like, I have no business buying this type of note with this kind of guy. I don't want an opponent that can do that to me, right? I want to have somebody that is like, how could I stay in my house? How can we, I love helping, like, you know how I cut that guy's interest rate to 0? I love doing that kind of stuff, right? But if you're going to sue me in court because you know how to play the system, that makes this not so much fun anymore.
That's just part of being in a judicial state.
Right.
You're gonna
You're going to get your lumps.
imagine if California was judicial.
No, I don't want to do that. But there's some people that make a lot of money in these judicial states, but they spend their time learning how to do it. I didn't spend the time. I know California really well. I'm really confident in California. Have I bought notes in other states? Yes. Will I still do it? Rarely. It would have to be like very specific situations. But I find that I have plenty of prospects here in California with my breadth of experience now that there's a lot of ways that I can make a note work.
What's your and Rick's blog called?
Oh, it's called the Hunting Club, Real Estate Hunting Club. We did a bunch of podcasts on that a while back. Yeah. One more question. Yes?
Can I buy a house with a bank loan, sell it on a land contract, and create a note from that, and then sell that note?
That sounds like a legal question. I'm not an attorney. I don't know. I wouldn't do it, but that's just me.
Well, here's the thing. So, because Alice is our presenter tonight, and I always arm wrestle and twist the arm of our presenter. You're staying, aren't you?
I am staying.
Right? So guess what? He's staying. So you can ask him that question. Because we're going to be staying tonight. So now, before you get off the stage, you're working on something new.
Yes.
Are you ready to tell us what that new thing is? Just a little window?
I'll give you a little snippet. So I showed you the logo of the Cash Flow Nerds. So I have a book in the works. It's called The Cash Flow Nerds Playbook, the Guide to Financial Freedom, or Your Guide to Financial Freedom. So what it's going to be, it's going to be kind of a historical account of all the different things I've done, and also other people that I've interviewed and kind of their techniques of how to get cash flow. Because whether it comes to real estate or anything else, it really doesn't really matter, because it's all, that's how you really get financial freedom, is through cash flow. I used to flip properties, and there's nothing wrong with flipping, but what I did realize is that it was really nice to come home and get a check in the mail that I didn't have to work for that hard. So, like I said, I'm a cash flow nerd, so that book is going to be coming out soon. If you go to my website,
Is the website up?
the website is up. It's very raw. I apologize, but I think there's a form. My assistant put up a form up there, so you give your name and your email address. I'll give you kind of a snippet of the first couple of chapters or so. So we're still in the works, but it's been something that I've been really excited about, because I think about all the things I've done, and it's really been the cash flow is what has turned my life around. It's not the big deals that I've done where I've flipped this and this. It's really about the cash flow. There's a book by John Schaub called Making It Big with Little Deals. I love that title, because although it's really cool to brag to your friends about the big deals, the little deals that I do on a regular basis are the ones that really bought me a lot of freedom. So I want to share that with you.
And being able to take the big deals and roll them into a cash flow
Right.
is where you actually are able to ensure your independence and freedom, which is where we started the meeting,
Right.
from now until you pass it on to your children.
Right. And that's a very good point, is that in order
Or
to do
your
big deals
family.
responsibly, the little deals are the ones that kind of keep you afloat, right? While you're waiting for
While
those
you're waiting
things.
for the big ones to come in.
Right, yeah.
So therefore, Ellis is going to be here, so he'll be available after tonight. He'll be standing, after we're done tonight, he'll be here in the room
Yes.
until his food is ready. So let's give Ellis a hand.
Thank you, guys.
You can have your computer back in just a
Nice. Thank
So
you so
let
much.
me